If we can get every employee learning one new thing every week, I mean, that's just huge. For the first time ever in management, they're having to learn from younger people, and they're having to lead a transformation that they don't quite get themselves.
This is the vinJones Podcast, Secrets of the Engaged Employee, with Kevin Jones of vinJones.com.
Welcome. Today we have Bart Schutte, who is the Director of Digital Learning for, if you're an American, you call it Saint-Gobain. But if you're French, you call it?
Saint-Gobain.
So that exact whatever.
And of course, but I'm not French, right? So I'm pronouncing it the way some Americans do. But I've been over here long enough that I think I've got it about right.
Yeah, it sounds good. It's a lot better.
It's interesting. We actually, on our social network, somebody asked the question, American, so how should you say Saint-Gobain, in the United States? And it started a long discussion on the social network about, well, how should you do it? And I forwarded the message to our communications director, and I said, I think you ought to jump in here because maybe we ought to have a policy. And she goes, actually, I don't care how people pronounce it as long as they say it, right? But it was an interesting discussion on our social platform.
Very good. That is kind of funny. Huh. So you've been with Saint-Gobain for how long?
I've been with them about 12 years, something like that. I joined in December 2003, initially in the IT department, where I spent 8 years. And then 3.5 years ago, they asked me to take on the leadership of what was then called the e-learning team at the group level, and has now evolved to become digital learning and is a much bigger and completely different animal than it was before.
So we met about, 5 years ago? Is that
we met
right?
in 2010. Yeah, 5 years ago.
Okay, so it was. Wow, you even remember the year. I'm impressed. I don't remember.
It was a transformational year for me.
Why is that?
Well, because I got invited to join the 2.0 Adoption Council. And through that, it really drove home the power of social learning through social platforms. Because I joined the community 6 or 7 months after it had been created and had been spending months trying to learn to become an expert on social collaboration inside the enterprise by reading blogs and whatever, and then discovered this rich community. And I spent the month of January reading all of the content that was there, seeing all of the conversations that had gone on, and then reconstituting and synthesizing what I heard and feeding it back to the community. And I felt like within 1 month, my level of expertise had just exploded. And through that community, I also discovered the power of social networks, of Twitter, of all of that. And that actually, was sort of a transformational moment for me. It was when I really discovered what Harold Jark calls personal knowledge management, which is this use of all of these digital tools to continually feed information into yourself and allow you to stay continually abreast of things. Good.
Transformational year. That was a transformational year for me as well, because I got into the E2.0 Adoption Council kind of near the beginning there, in 2009, and then that year itself, even though I was doing a lot of that, you're right, that group absolutely took off. And we had so many incredible discussions in there and met so many fabulous people. It was, and then the E2.0, what was it?
The conference in Boston?
The conference, yeah. We went to Boston, and that was a great year as well.
Yeah. Well, and that was where we did the workshop the day before, and you and I were on the same panel. I forget what it was about, but
that's right. Yeah,
that was it.
That was good stuff. Good stuff.
It was.
Love
a great year.
Being at conferences is incredible because it's the sessions are good and the keynotes are good, but it's this interaction that I love more than anything else. If I don't want to say that I'd spend all my time in the halls meeting people, but just about, because that's where the really good discussion comes in. It's this kind of stuff, and I wish we could even do this even more than we do right now.
Yeah. Well, conferences are always serving sort of multiple levels, right? The people that come and enroll and pay are there to learn, and so the formal sessions are really good for them. But then the practitioners who are there speaking get much more out of the out of session conversations, because it's allowing them to specifically ask questions that are directly relevant to them and move forward. That was an interesting event, though, because it was 4 or 5 months after I joined the 2.0 Adoption Council. I had met everybody virtually, and then I arrived at the event and saw all of these faces who I'd never met physically before, but you felt like you were already close friends, and everybody came up and hugged and kissed, and it was really strange because never had that happen before. So people say you can't create strong bonds virtually; you have to meet physically. It's nice meeting physically, but we had created strong bonds just virtually as well.
Absolutely. It was amazing how strong those were once we all got together. I was surprised myself. I had been talking about it for so long and at different conferences speaking about it and writing about it, but and I had experienced it to some degree, but it wasn't until that conference that same thing with me, it drove it home about how strong, people say, you have to meet in the carbon. You have to get to know them one-on-one, that these virtual just can't replace. And I agree, it can't replace, but I'll tell you that it augments and it enhances even the virtual or the face-to-face relationships. It was incredible. Yeah.
It was incredible. And it's interesting, I've never had a community like that since then. I've tried to
me too,
enter into e-learning communities and stuff, and nothing had the dynamic of that E2O council. And, so why was that? Well, maybe one of it was the animation of some of the people. I think a big part of it was the people who were involved, and everybody was on this mission.
Agreed.
And I think to some extent, as much as I love Jive and the social collaboration, it was the use of Yammer, sort of like that always on dial tone that made us feel like we were in the same room all the time. And I remember Bryce Williams jumping on and saying, I've just gotten called up to the CFO's office. What should I answer when he asked me this question? And immediately 5 people are jumping in and answering. And so I described it to people. I said it was like the dial tone of the internet. I mean, we were there listening, ready. But at the same time, I haven't implemented a Yammer-like capability internally because I felt like too much of what was being said was the value was disappearing. We were copying good conversations back to Jive, and what I wanted to do was to force people to use Jive. And we were an exceptional bunch in the sense that this was our job. I spent my whole day sort of researching this stuff and being online. Right. My colleagues can't do that. My colleagues, their time is 5 or 10 minutes a day. And even me today, I don't have the time to hang out on the social platforms the way I did then because that was my mission. Now my mission's learning, and even I struggle to get onto our collaborative platform frequently enough to contribute and to be there to answer questions.
So if that is changing the way we communicate and the way we have interpersonal relationships within a company or within a group like that, there are some really interesting changes in learning as well. And you are experiencing that firsthand because you are the director of digital learning. So tell us, if you would, how learning is changing inside of your company compared to where it was maybe 5, maybe 10 years ago. I don't know how, maybe last year,
2 years ago.
So how has it changed?
It's changing so quickly, and it's being driven by technology, by the internet, by new behaviors. And, to me, there are probably maybe 2 or 3 key things to talk about, and I don't want to talk at length about them. But, so the first one is MOOCs, right? Massive open online courses. That is a phenomenal shift outside of the enterprise. But it's interesting for the enterprise as well, because we used to build courses on project management and leadership and all those sorts of things. In fact, we still do build them. And yet you can go out online and there are some 2,000 MOOCs running live at any one point in time about pretty much any subject you'd want from some fantastic universities. Not all MOOCs are created equal. Yes, people have trouble staying engaged. But if you want to learn, it's when you want, how you want, at home, at night, we should really be exploiting those. So one of the things that we are doing is integrating the public MOOCs into our learning catalog. And we're not the only ones that are doing that. L'Oreal is doing it, and I believe Dannon is doing it as well. I think that's phenomenal. The second is the power of the internet and Twitter and what Harold Jark calls personal knowledge management. I begin a lot of my digital presentations, which I do several every month as part of our learning programs. And I begin them sometimes by saying that I have 150 people that work for me. And what they do every day is scour the internet for the best content that day in their area of expertise, and then they send it to me so that every night I can sit down and consolidate it all together and stay abreast of my area of interest, right? And those 150 people don't even know that they work for me, and we've never even met. We don't know each other. Who are they? They're the people that I follow on Twitter, right?
Right.
And it's hugely valuable. And these are professors, these are authors, these are highly paid consultants, right? And that is transformational. So we talked earlier about the E2.0 Adoption Council. And in 2009, as I was making our selection for Jive Software, I didn't have those tools. And so what was I doing? I was looking at people's blogs, and I was subscribing to RSS feeds, but it wasn't the same thing. And it was when I discovered the 2.0 Adoption Council and the power of the social network that it was really transformational for me. So when I took on this job in 2011, I knew nothing about learning, right? I knew technology, but I knew how to learn. And so the first thing I did was I went out to Twitter and I started finding experts in enterprise learning, organizational learning. And I discovered people like Harold Jark, Charles Jennings, Jane Hart. And within 3 months, I was promoting a new vision for learning and digital learning within my organization.
Wow.
Right? Something that others could have been doing, but they didn't have the tools and didn't know how to use them the way that I had. So for enterprises today, for me today, that's a real mission. And the third part is how we actually build and construct learning internally. We used to historically, we'd get a request for some learning and we'd either build a seminar or we'd build an e-learning, and that was it. Sometimes we'd make the e-learning a prerequisite to the seminar and we'd call it blended learning. Well, now what we're doing is we're really creating what are really MOOCs internally, using all of these different types of technologies. So the big changes are 3. The MOOCs on the internet, the power of the internet tools to do personal knowledge management, and the creation of MOOCs internally as the best way of creating corporate learning for the subjects that are proper to us and that we should be creating.
All right, so let me ask you this question, because I was more heavily in the learning space a few years ago, really before 2009, and I found when I would talk about these concepts to those who were in the learning space, or really just to managers overall, management executives, I was finding that there was a lot of pushback, because what would happen is that really what you're doing is empowering employees and saying, go learn on your own and learn as much as you can, but it's not recorded. And the learning industry was, and I don't know if still is, so focused on making sure that if you take a class, I want to record it and even test you on it to make sure you learned something. But doing it this way, having a really personal knowledge management, like Harold talks about, you can't record that. I mean, it's really, a lot of it is on your own, and the accountability is on you rather than on the management. So how has St. Gobain's management taken to that notion that it's really more on the employee to do that than it is on making sure we make sure you go through every single class that you absolutely have to?
Well, it's still early days for us. One of the things that we're focusing on is transforming the learning organization to fully adopt these new types of digital learning mechanisms. But as you and I have talked about in the past, my personal mission is to educate everybody about their need and ability to learn continually. Now, so how is our organization accepting that? Because it does create challenges, as you said, in terms of how do you recognize that? Well, one of the things is that testing has never been a very effective way of recognizing, skill acquirement. The only thing that matters is performance changes, right? Is your manager recognizing that there's a performance improvement and things like that? So we're doing some surveys of managers 6 months afterwards to see what they're thinking. But the bigger thing is that we're really focusing on the new thing is sort of colleague recognized competence. And so we've taken a page from LinkedIn and we've now added into our social collaborative platform the ability for employees to declare competencies, skills, whatever, and for other employees to validate them. And that's being led by HR, right? HR said we need a better way to gather competencies because the current ways of doing it are not effective. So already we've got HR behind that.
Wow.
How do managers feel? I think, to be honest, your average manager isn't very focused on learning,
Sure.
learning in a broad
Right.
sense. What they'll be interested when they know they've got a guy or a woman that needs some training and they get them the training at that moment and then they put them in a position. But the broader continual development type of learning is not one of their priorities. It needs to be. Now, why do I say that? The business world is changing so quickly, right? We all know about that. The skills that are in desperate need inside the enterprise today are things that we didn't even talk about 2 years ago. Big data, analysts, community managers, social community management, and things like that. I mean, the list just goes on and on. 3D printing, etc. So people aren't learning that in universities. If we go out and try to hire it, we're competing with, with everybody else. And so it's really hard to get those people. And so the best way is to develop it in-house. And the best way to do that is to create this culture of continual learning where people are being naturally brought to these new topics because they're curious and whatever. And so pretty much by the time you need it, they've got it. If you really create that culture. I keep saying, so we have 200,000 employees. If we can get every employee learning one new thing every week, that's just huge compared to, how many thousands of training days do we do a year for 200,000 employees? We're just scratching the surface.
I agree, absolutely. So the colleague recognition competence that you were talking about, does that replace assessments from managers, or does it augment? Or how do those two fit together, or do they fit together at all?
Well, we're just working through that because we just launched it a little while ago. Like weeks ago.
Okay.
The main goal was to help HR find the right person for new positions, right?
Gotcha.
So I need somebody that speaks Korean, that worked in the U.S. and that knows insulation, right? And a lot of times you just don't have that information correctly recorded in the official HR systems. But often it's out on people's LinkedIn profile. And so what we want to try to do is bring that in inside the organization. But as we've been talking about it, we've been saying, well, maybe now this can also be a subject for discussion during the annual appraisal between the manager and the individual. Great. We also want to add a subject during the annual appraisal, which is self-led learning. What are you learning this year? How are you learning? How can I, as the manager, help you? Do you know about these resources? We're just beginning that as well. And then the other thing is to try to get away from the once-a-year annual appraisal. We know that's not effective, and we want to get to sort of a more continual appraisal and I don't want to say a 360 because 360 is a loaded term, but a full appraisal from colleagues, from people who work from you, from customers, from partners. We talk about the digital generation or the people who are. I don't think there's a big Gen Y thing versus non-Gen Y. It's either people who get digital and people who don't get digital. And the people that get it have now developed this culture of evaluation, of rating, of liking. And not only do they want to like and rate everything, they also want to be liked and rated themselves on a literally constant basis. So we're trying to put that into place. So I would say, we have a very forward-thinking, visionary HR director. And and she's pulling us forward in this direction. And so the HR team is there and is embracing this. A part of our big challenge in the next 2 years will be to get all of management to embrace this. But as I began saying, it's a competitive business challenge, right? In order for us to stay competitive, in order for us to be responsive and agile in the marketplace, we've got to be growing the talent internally, and we've got to be developing it almost before we know we need it.
Right. As you're saying that, I am amazed at all these technologies have brought in new aspects of new ways of working, really. And so here we've talked about learning, we've talked about organizational management, we've talked about HR, we've talked about appraisals, and they're all starting to really blend together. It's not, we've got someone's in charge of this one, someone's in charge of this one, and it may be that way organizationally, but those competencies and the way that you all work together are really starting to blend to where you really can't pick apart one or the other without affecting everything else as well.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
It's interesting. We're one of the things a program that we're running right now is an internal MOOC, or what should more appropriately be called a SPOC, a small private online course.
Okay.
It's for all of our HR managers, so 1,200 people around the world. And it's a 8-cycle learning program that we're developing ourselves and running ourselves. And each cycle takes about 3 weeks. And a cycle begins with a video-based e-learning that we create. And then there's a social activity, a social learning activity they have to do. And then we close it with a webinar, a webcast type of event. What we're seeing is, as a learning mechanism, it's much more effective than anything else we've done in the past. The fact that we have the webcast anchors it in time and keeps people engaged. They all do the e-learning, usually a day or two before, but they're all there on the webcast, and so it's really effective. Within that, we're talking about the impact of digital on the manager and on management. And you're right, as we're building this content and communicating it, everything is linking together from an HR perspective, but also from a manager's perspective. And the manager, and this comes right back to the whole theme here, is fundamental to the digital transformation of the organization. The manager is caught in the middle of this transformation. On the one hand, they have to lead their team in the digital transformation, but they don't necessarily get it themselves. So they have to first learn about it. 2, our world is becoming much more virtual. So they're having to learn how to manage virtually, how to establish themselves as a leader in a virtual team. We're becoming much more project-based than ever before. And so, managers are in a role of assembling competencies for a project and running it, which requires new competencies on their part, but the ability to quickly establish their role, for a team and run the team. We also know that the role of manager is, dramatically changing from one of being sort of the command and control sergeant or general to being one of coach, animator, leader, champion, and to end it, they're doing this in the context of this digital transformation, which literally for the first time ever in management, they're having to learn from younger people, and they're having to lead a transformation that they don't quite get themselves. And so, as our HR director says, she's saying this to our very senior managers, you have to have the courage to allow the change to happen, to even lead the change, even though you don't get it, even though you don't necessarily believe it. You have to make it happen. And that's never before really, I think, been encountered in management.
That is, wow. I think you just put right there one of the issues that we have overall, one of the major issues, and you said it so clearly, because with managers, when they are trying to lead this transformation that they don't understand, we have always been, well, I'll say always, that we understand, at least when we talk about management, managers get to a certain point and they hold a certain power, certain level of power. And so we almost think, okay, we kind of move up the corporate ladder and we get more power and we get more responsibility. And, it's not like we're trying to go for power, but that's what happens. And then all of a sudden, what you're talking about is managers kind of giving up that power and saying, all right, I'm kind of going with the flow here. I'm no longer in charge and leading, but I'm help directing and facilitating instead. And so their role becomes a bit different and their focus becomes a bit different to say, all right, you guys are going down the right path. I don't quite understand what that path is yet, but it seems like the right thing to do. Go forward. You know more about it than I do, which is a switch as well. And I will help support you. And is that basically
Right.
what you're saying?
Well, that's sort of characterizing it in almost its most, scary form. But it certainly won't. You're not going to see any manager saying, "Well, I don't get this, but hey, let's just go on. I trust you, and we'll see what the numbers come up to be at the end of the month." But it's really about pushing managers, and especially the senior managers, the general managers, to they've got to drive a change into their business now, even though they don't necessarily see the compelling need for it themselves because they're not very digital in their own lives. Now, what we're doing is we're trying to make them very, very digital through various programs, that we're rolling out, for digital culture and things like that every organization is doing. But like everything, it's led from the top, and our CEO is on board and is communicating all the
Great.
messages. Digital has been on our agenda for the last 4 years at all of the global meetings. So I think we're doing all the right things, but so it'll never be quite as flagrant as you said, but that's essentially what's having to happen, is that people are having to change. And I think it's even harder in an industrial company like ours, where much of what we do is, production, is transactional, is explicit and measurable activities. Managers are brought up, they measure the numbers, they measure the results, right? And that's like not what it's about today, right? You don't motivate people by doing that. And in today's world, we need to be more motivational. And it's interesting, why do we need to be more motivational? Why do we need to explain to people the why behind what they're trying to do and things like that? And the reason is this famous war for talent, right? I saw a great interview of Dick Costolo from Twitter the other day. I forget on what source it was, but somebody was asking him about, what they do to retain talent. And he was saying the first thing is that, the best people want to work with the best people. So you've got to do whatever you can do to hire and to retain the best people. And then the second thing you've got to do is continually explain to people the why behind what they're doing so that they're engaged and motivated. And if you don't do that, well, then the best people are going to go somewhere else where they are getting that sense of purpose, right?
Right.
I'm a big fan of Daniel Pink's book Drive, and the very simple messages of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I think that is fundamental. And how do you achieve purpose? Well, it's by, one, explaining the why. It's by, two, trying to put what you're doing in a context that is motivational. And for an example, when I look at Saint-Gobain, we build and distribute construction products for the habitats market, for big buildings and for homes, right? Generally what we call passive products. These are not, electronic monitors. It's insulation, roofing, mortars, and things like that. But what we're doing this in a context of, explosive global growth, where something like 2/3 of the world's population don't have adequate housing. We're trying to do it in an environment where people are becoming environmentally conscious, and therefore we need to be building our products in such a way where we're environmentally friendly. And third, we need to be, energy conscious, and many of our manufacturing processes are high consumers of energy. So as our CEO says it, we are in the habitats marketplace, and we are helping to respond to the global challenges that the world faces of growth, environment, and energy. That's very motivational, right?
Yes.
And we need to continually reiterate that to people. And then the third thing is as individual managers, we need to give people something bigger than just get the daily task done. What I love to hear people refer to as big, hairy, audacious ideas, right? And if you can paint a vision that gets people excited, and then you come back and you treat the autonomy and mastery, which is give them the space, give them the trust, be there as the coach to help them move forward, give them the space to make mistakes, and then learn from the mistakes. Well, now you've got all three elements of the formula there, and to me that's what makes an effective, motivated team be effective and motivated.
Wow, very good. That is so true. I'm so glad you brought up Dan Pink's book as well, because there's so many things in there that I think we can pull from all the way. And I would... okay, so if we go back to the conference and the conference idea and just sitting around and talking, this is what I'm talking about right here.
Yeah.
I mean, I am learning so much from you, and I'm loving it. I'm loving to see these things that, I'll write and talk about being applied, and you're saying how it's being applied in your company, and it's changing the way you manage, you work, you really provide for your why. How are you fulfilling that why that your company has? And it's firsthand right here. I love this, and I wish we could just go on and do this forever.
There's another interesting thing, Kevin, which is I tend to think that maybe the managers that get this the most are also the managers that get the internal social collaborative network the most. Right? They're the ones that are using it the most. And interestingly, they have a channel now that they never had before to demonstrate to other managers by example. I think that's huge, and that's driving accelerated change. And what we need to do is to encourage more of these managers to sort of, take the risk and show how they're managing in a different way on the social platform. And I definitely see that happening internally in our organization.
That's great. All right, so in wrap up here, I'd like you to leave us with a challenge, something that we can go do to enhance our work, to create better employees, or to be more engaged ourselves or our teams as well. Now, honestly, I think I could pick out a number of things already from what you said, but
I think there are two things, and one addresses every employee, and the other addresses the manager.
Okay.
Every employee needs to embrace personal knowledge management. And I say this at the end of all of my presentations. I say, do two things now. Go out and get a Twitter account and start following people who are pointing you to content that's of interest for you. I don't care what it is. If you look at my Twitter stream, I've got people that talk about organizational learning and social collaboration and running and painting and cooking and all the other things that I'm interested in.
Right.
And so it all comes together. Second, get Flipboard and install it on your tablet or your smartphone, and now you can get it on the PC, because Flipboard takes all that together, and what these people are doing are sending you links, right? And so that just goes and gets the links and puts together this incredibly sexy magazine that you flip through. That's the name Flipboard. And it makes it really easy to consume all that great content in a very small amount of time. So it definitely has made me much more effective. If everybody does that, it will be huge. Second, for managers, is really making that change, taking a risk, and trying to give people room to grow, room to try new things, to trust them, to let them grow. And you asked me to think about a couple of questions before I got here, and transformational moments. And I remember one time when I was working at Accenture on a very high-tech strategic project, an internal development effort, and we had a manager who was being asked to manage a technical part of the project that just wasn't, she didn't have the skills necessarily for it. And she was a good manager, but not knowing the technology well enough, she was struggling. And it was a high testosterone, environment, high pressure, and so there was a big a lot of people had said we ought to counsel her out. Counsel her out is consultant speak for, let go.
Right.
And, but we didn't do that. And what we did was we put her in a different position. I think, a position that we thought was like putting her off to the side. We made her responsible for development methodology and training. And it turned out she was fantastic at it. And what she did around methodology and training added huge amounts of value to what the rest of the team was doing.
Sure.
And she was so successful, and you could tell she was miserable before, and then she became really motivated. And shortly afterwards, she was promoted to associate partner. Right.
Wow.
So here was a talent that we were about to let go, who literally within 2 years we'd said, she's so good, she ought to be an associate partner. And that happened because, one, we put her in a position where she could leverage her strengths, and we gave her the headroom, and the manager who was responsible for her gave her the trust and support and confidence to allow her to grow. And I've seen that time and time again. But it's scary for most managers, because how do we learn how to manage? Did you learn how to manage when you were in college? I don't remember any management courses.
Right.
I learned to manage when I got out on the job and I saw what this guy was doing, and so that's what I started to do. And it's measuring, and it's Excel spreadsheets, and it's being a hard ass, and and then you eventually, when you reach 40, 45, and 50, and you start saying, that's not working. What works is I've heard it described as managing by love. And it really is that. And that gives people confidence to grow and to deliver huge amounts of value back to the enterprise. And it creates the engagement that you and I are continually trying to look for.
Perfect.
So that's the challenge for managers.
That's a great story. I love that. What a neat story. We see that all the time where, we talk about our company's why, our company's purpose, but there's also a personal purpose in there. And if we miss the opportunity to have someone in a role that can fulfill their purpose, then we're really devaluating the company and that person at the same time. But match those two up, and you have something like you were just describing with that woman who just excelled all of a sudden. How neat.
Absolutely.
Great challenge. Thank you so much for your time. I've loved getting to talk with you again.
Me too, Kevin. It's been a lot of fun. So hopefully we'll hook up at one of these conferences in the near future.
I hope so. Thank you.
Great. Well, pleasure to be with you. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Why spend 10 hours a day doing work you only tolerate? The more engaged your team is, the more productive they will be. These are the secrets to helping them love their work. Learn how to love your work and create an engaged workplace. Visit vinJones.com.